All right, so we are back for another session. Nope, another episode of Between Sessions.
Yes, two brown chicks changing the face of therapy on
both sides of the couch. This is a little different. I have a volunteer event on Wednesday, so we can't do live. Mm-hmm. So Lisa stayed at work late.
I did.
Waiting on me so we can make sure to give you guys some content on Wednesday. So today we are just going to talk about, this is the last week of February.
Yeah.
Actually, the Wednesday is the 28th, right?
Is it?
Yeah, today's the 26th. So okay. March is here.
Wow.
So for
right the
right. That's a big one. So for this episode, we are going to talk about premarital counseling. Mm-hmm. Just because during this month, quite a few people probably got engaged.
Yes.
From what I can tell. And especially even coming from the holidays, a lot of people getting engaged. So we're just going to chat about premarital counseling and what the different areas are that usually are discussed in premarital counseling, and how we see it as relationship therapists as if people would address it maybe earlier,
right,
then it wouldn't be such an issue.
Right.
So that's where we're going today. So have you done premarital counseling? I know you do relationship and sex counseling.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I've definitely, I don't do the prepare and enrich and all that, but I definitely have seen couples before they're ready to get married and kind of going over some of these conversations that a lot of people don't have.
Right, right. I was trained during my practicum time. I was at the Catholic Church working for a private practice who was based, it was different. Private practice based out of a Catholic church. That's where her office was.
Oh, okay.
It was her own private practice, but they just let her office there for free, and a lot of her referrals came from there. And one of the biggest things with her practice was that most of the premarital counseling in the city of Houston would have to go through her if they came through the Catholic Church. And so I was a lucky person that got to do a lot of that, which was awesome because it was a really good experience. I knew I always wanted to work with couples, so I really appreciate her letting me kind of start there with doing premarital counseling, because you don't necessarily have to be licensed to do premarital counseling.
Right, right.
And so they would refer to us, and I would do some individual. I've done some groups, and I love it because as I went through to work with more and more couples, I see the value in working on those things early on.
Oh my goodness. I wish more people would do it, you know, versus just kind of saying we're going to do, because I know the Catholic Church will do, like you have to do these classes.
Right.
But to really be able to do the therapy piece of it, that's so important. Right,
right. And I think it's important to, if nothing else, be very aware of what could be happening in the future.
Right.
So one of the things we would do is that we would, at the end, we would write a letter to the priest and or the pastor of that church that basically said this is what we saw, and the couples will see that. Well, we would tell the couples, but I believe they would see the letter as well, which was like, this is where they're strong, this is where they're doing well, these are some areas where there's room for improvement.
Trouble with the priest.
Right. And so, and then recommendations of how they should move forward as far as their marriage. So it was really, really well done.
That's fantastic.
Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah, and so now I offer premarital counseling within my practice, and I, like you said, I do the Prepare and Rich. I was Prepare and Rich trained in Focus, which was what the Catholic Church used before. And I love Prepare and Rich. I think it's so easy and simple, and in an easy way to have those conversations.
Yeah.
So before I go to the list, I'm looking at Prepare and Rich right now to look at the different areas. But what would you say is the biggest things or the biggest area that couples should be working on before they get married?
Expectations, just expectations. Working as a sex therapist, sexuality expert, I see a lot of what they had as far as expectations about what sex would be like, and if they were already sexual prior to marriage or moving into any sort of commitment. A lot of the times they are just overly optimistic that once they get married it'll get better,
right?
And they typically don't. But I would say, just what are your expectations of what you think this commitment is going to mean? Right.
I definitely agree. And I think expectations in all the areas. I tell my couples to plan out a year in the life as a married couple, so that they can see if they're on the same page. Because if I'm saying I want to go on vacation 3 times a year, and my partner is saying we need to buy a house in the next year or have kids, you need to make sure that you're understanding where you're going to be going and that y'all are on the same page. So
I like to tell them, define for yourself you know, what is my idea of the ideal spouse?
Mm.
Like what I will be
Mm-hmm.
and what I expect my spouse to be. Like what is the ideal spouse to me? Who do I think I should be? And then compare.
Right.
You know, like are your expectations or what you consider to be ideal what the other person is hoping for?
Right.
And do they think that what they're aspiring to be is what you want?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to go through the list a little bit, and we'll just kind of chat about the different areas and, like I said, the problems that we see with it once we do see the couples that have been married for a while. And I guess we'll talk about a few things that you can do
Mm-hmm.
before you get married to make sure that you're in a good space for that.
Yes.
Outside of going to premarital counseling, because I suggest premarital counseling
For
to anybody.
everyone.
Yes, it
you don't
doesn't
have
matter.
to be in crisis to go to therapy.
Exactly.
This is a great example of
And it
that.
doesn't matter how great your relationship is, because a big part of it is learning that things are going to change.
It's when they change.
Yes. And so since that's going to happen, it's kind of preparing you for that and opening up those conversations that maybe you didn't have.
Yeah.
But, so communication, which
Mhm.
I practice. That's my thing.
Yes.
I just think that being able to communicate effectively to another person, especially your partner,
Mhm.
will help you in all the other areas.
Right.
And so that openness to share ideas and thoughts without that fear of one being misunderstood, which I feel like most people feel,
Mhm.
and being judged and things like that. So
Yeah.
communication is a big one.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, to also go into it with the same enthusiasm that you have about being heard,
Mm-hmm.
use that same enthusiasm to hear what your partner is saying.
Right.
You know, because I think a lot of times people are like, oh, I want to be an effective communicator. And it's not just about the messages you're giving, it's how you're receiving
Mhm.
the messages.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. I was thinking when you said be enthusiastic, I'm thinking about how the whole men hate to hear we need to talk. And the frustration that, well, I guess that anxiety that those
Yeah.
words create for them,
Oh, yeah.
which is usually because they think we need to talk means I've done something wrong.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
As
Right.
opposed to we're just going to have a conversation.
Well, and just the idea, you know, we've talked about before that confrontation is a bad thing.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be a bad thing. It just means that you are confronting the issue that has presented itself at that time.
Right.
That doesn't have to be negative.
Right. And if you do have healthy communication tactics and
Mhm.
systems in place, then when we talk about these things, it doesn't mean you're not going to get upset. It doesn't
That's
mean that you're
right.
not going to have emotions around it, but it doesn't have to ruin the next month of your relationship.
Right. And it doesn't have to, you don't want to create damage to the relationship, you know, be that because you're avoiding it or because what you're saying in the heat of the moment, you know, you end up really hurting one another.
Right.
You know?
Right. I do say a lot of times that one of the bigger issues in relationships outside of the problems is the way that you communicate about the problems. Because like you said, it can cause way more damage than the actual issue itself.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have that healthy communication, you're going to have a hard time, one, discussing anything, and then discussing it without making it worse.
And I think it's also about you knowing that you come into the relationship with a certain communication style.
Right.
Like you cannot, you know, assign all of the fault to your partner.
Right.
Like, well, I can't talk to you, when you probably, even before coming into this, maybe you struggled,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And so I would really be curious also, you know, when you're doing this premarital work, finding out how your partner within their family, they resolved issues.
Right.
You know, were
Right.
they like yelling at everybody or
No, that's true. If you watch the family systems and how they communicate, a lot of times we do the same thing. So if I come from a house where we don't discuss anything, then I'm going to get in a relationship. We're not going to discuss anything, right? I'm going to hold everything to myself or feel like it takes a lot for me to share and things like that. So yeah, your communication patterns are definitely based on what you saw growing up. And if I grow up in a house where everybody yells, if I'm sensitive to that, your spouse may not even understand it. They can't even process it because this is just how we communicate with each other.
Right.
It's not a problem. I'm not being mean. I'm just loud.
I'm
'cause
just
everybody's-
loud.
Yeah.
That was
And it
my
can be
family.
triggering to some people. Right.
You know, like, why is everybody yelling at each other? We're not yelling. You know, we're just talking. That's how we talk, you know? But, you know, and on the flip side, if you did come from a family where it was like really loud. You could have gone the other way.
Right.
We're like, oh, you know, in my family it was just,
true.
you know, so really being aware of your communication style and your partner's communication style.
Right.
That will help to like not take things so personally too.
Exactly. So when they say certain things or do certain things, and you really look at it like, oh, okay, this is just the way they communicate. When we talked about the vocabulary thing, that's a big thing too. Like, we learn how to communicate from our parents, from the other people in our family, our older siblings, whatever. And so there's certain vocabulary that you might use that you've gotten from them that other people just, like I said, it might be triggering.
Right.
They may not understand it. It may not make sense to them. Like, why are you being so harsh when it's like, I'm not. This is just how I talk. These are just
why
the
you
words.
trying to tell me what to do?
Right. It's like,
no,
I'm really just requesting an action, but I probably said it as a statement instead of a question. You know, yeah. So all of that can turn into like a whole other thing if you really don't understand.
Because we do a lot of the times personalize stuff, you know?
Yes.
And especially when it's the person that you love, it's like, oh, you know, that's my trigger. You're doing it. Now that hurts that much more because why are you doing this to me? And it's like,
I'm not doing it to you.
Right.
It's not about you, really.
It's not. So we don't like to hear that.
We don't.
What you mean it's not about me?
Everything is about me. What are we talking about? So that kind of goes into conflict resolution. If you even have a conflict resolution, because a lot of times what happens is we just communicate, or just talk. I won't even say communicate. Talk, and then walk away, and that's it.
Yes.
And so you don't feel like anything has been resolved.
Yes, I was just talking about that earlier today, is that, you know, yes, there's a time where you can become too overwhelmed or what we call flooded, you know, and your body is just like danger.
Right.
You know, like
you were flooded on the road trip.
I was flooded on the road trip. I was like, okay.
Everybody stop talking. There's a lot going on.
I'm about to go to my happy place. I'm on a little bit of sleep. But yeah, like where your body just your nervous system is like, I can't take anymore.
Right.
And then depending on your history, that may be more sensitive, you know, than others. And so recognizing when your body is just kind of not working with you, to say time out, you know, but like you said, the key is, okay, but now that doesn't mean you get to say time out.
And we never come back to this. Which is, some people, depending on their communication style, that's their biggest fear, which is why they try to like talk it out, get it out, let's talk about it now, because we're never going to discuss it again. There are people that, this is going to get into a whole other topic. Let's just stop, because when it comes to communication, I can go all day, and we want to go
say it. That would have to be good.
Well, I'm just thinking about the, you know, two like styles of communication and styles of problem solving. And so if I'm a person that needs to process, you can give me all this information, and I need time to think about it. But if I'm kind of an anxious person, or a person that's like, no, we need to get this done now, because what if you don't come back?
Right.
And a lot of times, those two people marry each other.
Absolutely.
And so one person is like, no, we need to fix this now. Another person's like, I just need some time to think and get, you know. And so one of the things is you have to, one, give that person that space. So respect who they are, respect the space they need. But then the other person has to respect the fact that you're over there anxious waiting, and come back and talk about it. So when we talk about timeouts, when you do a timeout, set a time. Like, have a time limit, whether that's 5 minutes or 55 minutes.
Right.
I always say start longer, just because that person that's more passive, more needs more time to process. The first 15-20 minutes, they're waiting on you to come and tell them, we need to talk about this again. And so then they'll say, oh, they're really not going to come this time, so now I can process it.
Right. Yeah, well, and I think that's where the individual work is necessary also, because you have to learn how to emotionally regulate yourself, right? Yeah. And so that's why the premarital counseling is so helpful, because some of this will be me doing personal regulation and understanding what's happening in my body. Why I'm saying, you're not going to say anything? What you going to say? What you want me to say? You know, not that I know of any of these.
No one does that.
No one does that, right? But what you going to say? You're not going to say nothing. And just understanding that maybe your partner's like glazed look is not that they don't care. It's they're really like going through something right now, and that the other one say something. They're in distress also. So one is understanding that, but then you learning like how to regulate when you get triggered.
Right.
Like, okay, I have to also, like, you know, take a step back, or like, this is what's happening to me. So knowing yourself, knowing your partner, and then knowing what's happening, you know, the cycle that you're getting caught up in.
And owning your responsibility and being a part of that cycle.
What are you contributing to the problem?
And the idea of, like, when you present someone with an issue, right? You've probably been thinking about that issue for like 4 days. You've processed it. You thought about what you're gonna say. You thought about how you're gonna talk to them.
When you did it last time.
Right. And then you finish and you look at that person and expect them to have the right response right then and there. After you've had 4 days to think about what you're gonna say. So you have to give your spouse the benefit of the doubt and give them time. Like, they're not doing anything to hurt you. It's just people process and deal with things differently. Yeah.
I think that's one of the greatest takeaways that you can take from doing this premarital work, is to really understand that. You know, this is the internal process that is happening within them. Because I do think when you are in the honeymoon phase, you know, it might annoy you, but you may not necessarily go through the steps to figure out what's happening.
Right. Yeah, true. So you said earlier, expectations. I'm gonna skip down to sexuality and affection, and just what do you expect when you get married of sex, of affection? If the person you're engaged to is not a touchy-feely person, do you expect that to change just because y'all gotten married? Right. If y'all are having sex once or twice a week, are you like, but once we get married, it's going to be 3 or 4 times a week? So what are these expectations that you have of the physical part of your relationship?
I mean, it's so, again, just like anything else, it's not going to just automatically change because now, you know, you may or may not share the same last name, or you're living in the same place. Like, if anything, the sharing more responsibilities and seeing one another more frequently, that's going to require even more effort for you to really cultivate, like, the eroticism in your relationship.
Right.
So expectations and flexibility, you know, flexibility that just like any other aspect of your relationship, your sexual relationship will change too.
Right.
That's not a bad thing.
Right.
You know, be open to being able to discuss it, because I mean, I'm not surprised. Oh, that's our 20 minutes.
Finish your statement.
I'm not surprised, you know, when I see that couples don't even talk about it. Right? They struggle to even talk about sex. Right. So definitely having the discussions.
So we were discussing sexuality and just those expectations of what intimacy is for you, what eroticism is for you. Some of those fears, that's something that we like to talk about a lot, is sometimes one of the questions is there anything that you're worried that your spouse would ask you to do sexually? And people don't think about that, you know?
They don't think about it, and they don't talk about it, and then they don't always have, you know, the verbiage, you know, to discuss it. And one of the, you know, I've said this before, shaming your spouse is one of the most detrimental things that you can do to having the dialogue about sex, because then they're like, oh, well, I don't want to, nobody wants to feel judged or shamed or, you know, so, but I think people are just even afraid of the conversation, because a lot of times they want to know what this means. What's it mean that you're turned on by X, Y, Z? And so working with someone ahead of time can give you facts, you know, about what that means.
Right, and more understanding of sexuality and how that works, and that is, you know, like a big thing we talk about a lot is like what you watch in porn versus what you want in real life, right? So just understanding, it's kind of, premarital counseling is really about the education of relationships and of these different areas. And
you know, I think sometimes people are scared to pull the thread, and it's like, what if I pull the thread? Maybe that big wedding won't happen, and it's like, yeah, but it will show up again. Right. It is going to show up again. And so the best thing that you can do is start to address it now, because chances are it's not going to change. And if it's an issue now, you can safely assume it's gonna show up again.
Right. What about finances?
Finances. I always tell couples, I'm like, there's two things. A lot of times you can avoid certain discussions and topics. It's like, oh, we're not going to talk about that. But when it comes to sex and money, they get our attention.
Right.
They get our attention. And it's just like, again, are you on the same page? Do you have the same values? Are you going to share bank accounts? Are you going to have separate bank accounts? Are you going to have a budget? Because sex and money, they're so triggering.
Right. And have you dealt with your issues surrounding those two things, right? Because I think that's a big part of it. People don't recognize the issues that we tend to have related to money based on how we grew up, based on how much money we had when we grew up, based on how we saw money used in our families. So that affects how you view money as an adult.
Absolutely.
When you talk about scarcity mindset or things like that, where you're struggling to even understand, taking care of yourself financially, with money and things like that. So I think that's and again, going back to that individual work, sometimes it takes time to really figure out, why do I have so many issues surrounding money?
Right. What's the value that I place or assign to it?
Right.
Other than the monetary value.
Right.
But what is the value that money holds in my life? And that's some deep work that a lot of people don't do, because it's so activating to people to talk about money and sex. It's like those two topics, you just can't get around it.
Right. One exercise that I recently, I don't know if it was a podcast or a book or what, but they said, it was a lady, I think it was a book, and she was saying to think about, when you think of somebody that's rich and has an abundance of money, how do you view them? What personality traits do you think they have? Are they good or are they bad? And if you have negative thoughts about this person, how are you going to achieve this thing that a lot of people say they want? Same with like the person that's always struggling. Like, what are your thoughts surrounding that person? Do you call them irresponsible, or are you making like, oh, maybe they're just helping people out or whatever? So these views that we have of with money, without money, whatever the case may be, affect who we are, affect how much money we make, affect how we think about money, and also just your spending habits. Like, everybody has different spending habits.
That's right.
There has been studies that show that men spend more money on big ticket items while women spend more money on smaller things, and at the end of the year, you spend about the same amount of money. And so when we complain about like, well, she's always buying this and that and bringing it into the house, I only buy like one TV a year. Like, it's probably about equal, right?
I'm shopping over here at Target in the kitchen.
Right, exactly. You just bought this $10,000 TV. So it's not necessarily as big of a difference as difference.
Well, and I think it's. I love what you said about what's the value that you place on it, and how do you see yourself, as that person, because that's very similar to the conversation with sex, that I often have with women is like, what do where does your mind go when you think of a sexual woman?
Right.
Right. And
That's
then
true.
We wonder kind of like, well, why are we disconnected from our sexuality? Why are we disconnected from our finances? But I think the other piece, it's like, okay, not to scare everybody from like, oh my God, like what are we? But it's to also know, now you're also building a new relationship. So you may not be able to do things the way you always did it. Because I think that's what so often happens. It's like, you go into this relationship with like, well, this is who I am. Well, this is who I am.
Right.
Well, who are we?
Who are we together as a couple, though? Yeah. And that's not to say that you're going to lose yourself in the relationship.
No.
But with any type of relationship, friendship, family, spousal, whatever, there is compromise.
There's compromise, and there's the opportunity for growth, because that's what really relationships allow for us to do, because if it's just me by myself, I'm not really necessarily gonna be challenged in a way where it's like, well, maybe you need to address your sarcasm. Maybe I need to address my spending habits, right? But when you're in a relationship, especially a committed relationship, this also offers you the opportunity for growth. That's why it's challenging, and I don't think we talk about that enough. We just talk about the butterflies and the seed and all the,
Yeah, and it's a lot more than that. A lot more. Okay, so I'm going to talk about maybe like one more. Should we talk about children? or relationship roles?
I would say talk about children.
Okay.
Because what I've seen a lot is if you're gonna be with somebody and they say, I don't want children, I'm never gonna want them.
Right.
Take it for what they're
Right.
saying.
Right. Do not.
Don't get into it and say, that's what they're saying now,
Right.
but when we're together and they see, you know, the nieces and the nephews, they'll change your mind. Maybe, but let's just bank on that they won't.
Right. Right.
And, you know, just how much having children changes the relationship also.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. I definitely agree that you have to, with all of these areas, where is the person at right now in their beliefs?
Mm-hmm.
Things change, of course. They might change for the better, but they might not. They might
not.
change for the worse, you know. So how are you at accepting who this person is right now in this moment? And are you thinking that marriage is going to change them?
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, it might, but you shouldn't go into marriage thinking that because now we have this commitment or this level of commitment, everything's going to change. There are certain things this person isn't going to do anymore.
Right.
Like, they're probably going to be the same person they are. That's not to say some people don't change, but
Right.
it's just more than likely they're going to be who they are.
Right.
And so when it comes to like kids, if they have said if they've said they do want kids,
Right.
and you're like,
Yes.
you say that, but
Yeah.
that's because you really don't know. We'll see if in the future how you change your mind. Parenting styles.
Yes. Like, how are we going to raise the children? What values will we place?
Right.
You know, if spirituality or religion is important, are you the same religion? Do you
Right.
have the same spiritual beliefs? How will that be practiced? How will you share
Mhm.
the responsibilities of parenting? And I think also discussing what might happen if we don't foresee that we struggle to have children.
Right.
You know,
Right.
if there are some fertility issues.
Yep.
Because that can really, really take a toll on the individuals, you know, them as individuals and as a couple.
Yeah.
You know, so sometimes it's hard for them to know if there are fertility
Mhm.
issues, but is there a history of that in your
Mhm.
in your families?
Yeah. Yeah.
How will you handle it?
Mhm.
If both of you really want children and for some reason you can't.
Right. Is adoption an option?
Mhm.
Are we financially stable enough to be able to do in vitro? Because that is expensive.
Right.
You know, so have you had those conversations while you're planning to have children? And even just and of course I always have people say it's never the right time. You know.
Yeah.
You can never be like, okay, once we get this amount of money in the bank, we'll have kids. One, because if it's infertility problems or anything like that, you really can't control.
Right.
But that doesn't mean you can't prepare and plan and think about the what ifs.
Right.
And try your best. Of course, when situations happen, you never know what you're going to do. But at least if we have this open line of communication, when those things happen, we know we can talk about it. And that's what a lot of this is about.
Yes.
It's starting a line of communication. It's starting the educational piece so that when these problems arrive, not if, but when,
Mhm.
you have the language and you have the openness and faith that y'all can get through it because
Yes.
y'all have already started those conversations.
Creating the vision of what your life together will be like.
Right.
And then having the tools in place, having the bond in place that on the way there, if there's a detour, how do we stay together?
Right.
You know, I saw someone had posted this online and I was like, oh, that's so beautiful. It was some poem, but it was like, you know, and I'm paraphrasing, but it was like if you are trying to get to Italy and you're excited to get to Italy and you have your plane ticket and you're arriving and you arrive and they say, I'm sorry, there's been a detour, you're not in Italy, you're in Paris,
Mm-hmm.
you're in France. You know, if you spend your whole time lamenting that you didn't
Mhm.
arrive at Italy, you're gonna miss all of the beauty
Right.
in France.
Right. Right.
And so I think that's really what creating this vision is about.
Mm-hmm.
This is where we want to go and this is how we want to grow together. But if there are detours along the way, this is how we're still going to be good.
Right, right. And we're going to enjoy whatever detours we have and try to make the most of it because we have made a good foundation for our relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And even with the children, really being clear as far as how our relationship will, some people prioritize the relationship they have as parents
Right.
versus, hey, how those kids got here.
Right, right. That's true.
So much.
All right. Well, it's like 5 or 6 other categories, but the biggest thing is the most important part I feel about the premarital counseling is the opening up about these discussions.
Yes.
and having these discussions that you probably, you may assume, maybe we talked about it when we first got together, maybe we've never discussed it. So it's just having those conversations and being very honest in them and understanding that it could change, but am I going to be able to come to you and say like, hey, I know I said, I wanted to have 2 kids, but now we got this one. I want to break.
We have the return paper.
Right. So things change, and,
Yes,
and how accepting are we to those changes? So.
It's so true. What you're saying is, regardless, you are getting in the habit of conversing.
Right.
And addressing topics that are sometimes uncomfortable. And you're learning the skills on how to do that, outside of therapy.
Right. All right, well, that's our talk on
that was good.
Premarital counseling. Yes, that was awesome. One of my favorite topics.
Yes.
So make sure you guys follow us across social media, Melanin and Mental Health, Melanin Health on Twitter, and listen to the podcast audio on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play. We still need reviews on iTunes. We see a few trickling in, and we really appreciate it. So make sure to go leave a review. You can also catch this video on YouTube if you're not seeing it on Facebook right now. And I think that's it.
Yeah, and visit us on Melanin and Mental Health.
MelaninandMentalHealth.com. Blogs being put up every week. This podcast is there as well. And lots of dope clinicians signing up.
Yes.
So we're getting excited. We had 3,000 people visit the site.
That is fantastic.
Yeah.
That's so exciting.
So strange. Anyway, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Bye.